Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is the progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. Remember, you can also send me a tweet to EGBERTOWILLIES. That is, at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is politics done right.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, folks, welcome to one more edition of Politics and Run. I'm Egberto Willies, your host. Thank you so kindly for being a part of the show. We are going to have a great show for you today. First, we're going to start a bit, not completely local, but this is something that affects the entire country. And we are going to show also that this actually affects real people. Title of the show today is Activist Eleanor Goldfield, Democracy in Dire Straits. And then, but before that, we have Why Houston's Burning. Hey, folks. Subtitle of the show, Activist Eleanor Goldfield did not mince her words as she pointed out the systemic failure of the current political system, suggesting that a third party is in order. Really, we'll see what she has to say about that. Houston Metro, Petro Capital, is burning because ... It would have been hard to escape the massive black plume emanating from several tanks owned by Intercontinental Terminal Company (ITC) in Deer Park, Texas, a city in Metropolitan Houston. The area is already not a panacea of healthy air, healthy water, or healthy soil, as the petroleum and chemical industries in the area have always been more concerned with profit over humanity. We will talk to Annie Barras and Marisel Orozco, residents in the area, about their experience. We will talk to community organizer a bit later. Right now, we have in our second segment, we have a very, very informative interview with political activist, writer, poet, and singer Eleanor Goldfield. Eleanor gave me a compelling interview that everyone needs to hear, specifically progressives. Look, Eleanor Goldfield is the host of the show Act Out, which is broadcast on Free Speech TV. Visit her website at artkillingapathy.com. And without further ado, we're going to start here with Marisel Orozco. Marisel, how are you doing today?
Doing all right.
You're doing all right. Marisel, let me ask you a few things first of all. How did you become aware of this explosion on the tanks and all this fire coming out at you?
I actually didn't find out about it until Monday morning. I believe my husband told me about it. He'd read some things online. It's not like we were notified. We live in Pasadena. I didn't receive any type of phone call or anything like that. But that Monday morning, I woke up with my nose completely stuffed, rough throat, coughing, and I didn't know if it was pollen or what. Allergies, regular allergies, but finding out that this happened, of course, it made me worry.
So it was over a day before you actually found out something happened then?
Yes.
So nobody came, the company never came out there, they never gave you any information, they never came out and tell folks to stay in place or anything of that nature?
No, I didn't get a phone call from the city until I believe it was Thursday when they notified the news about the elevated levels of benzene.
Oh, really? So all the while you had not been notified neither by the company nor the government. Is that correct?
Yeah, I wasn't notified. I didn't receive a phone call or anything like that, anything personal. I mean, I've signed up for notifications for any type of alerts or emergencies, but I didn't receive anything like that until Thursday on my way to work around 8.
Oh, so you're still going to work?
Yeah, everything else I had to find out through news outlets, social media. And, I mean, my nose can tell the difference, but, I wasn't properly informed.
Right. Now, you said you're in Pasadena. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, now where does Pasadena stand relative to Deer Park? I know where it's at, but this is for the audience that some of our audience are all over the states.
Well, my home is actually about 10 miles from there. Just a few exits down. We're really close to 225.
Oh, wow.
Which is, the highway.
Right, that corridor.
Near the ITC fire, the ITC. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would think that they would notify you and let you know something was going on, because that is very serious. But that is how a whole lot of these companies operate. And I imagine still to this day they haven't told you what the levels of benzene or anything is. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, look, Marisela Orozco, thank you so kindly for being with us. I mean, we really wanted to hear your part of the story, how it affects somebody personally. Now, do you have any kids? Do you have that live in the home with you?
I do. I have a 1-year-old. And it's he and I and my husband, and right now I'm actually pregnant, so. It's very stressful to find out that something like this happened and not know what to expect from here on out, or if my health is at risk, how much at risk, or the health risk of my family members, my little one.
Wow, how is your kid? Did your kid have some breathing problems as well?
I mean, he's coughing. I know kiddos get sick in daycare, but I mean, this cannot be healthy at all for him.
Right, because
it's not going to help him in any way.
Right, the plume came right over that area as well. Is that correct? Because I mean, I have pictures. The people who are seeing your picture along with the background, they are seeing a hell of a smoky plume that's going all over, including it seems like it's going over 225 as well.
Oh yeah, it was very dark. It wasn't a rain cloud. It was just a super dark smog of just pollution all over the city.
Now, I think you told me earlier on that while you may not have gotten, or you're not aware of any black soot or anything on your equipment, your cars or anything like that, you said you did know of people who had that. Is that correct?
Yes. On the other side of Pasadena, I heard and I saw images of that on their front lawn, on their vehicles.
Right.
They took pictures, and though we didn't have that, the smell was so strong. We decided to go ahead, even though we weren't notified to shelter in place or anything like that. We didn't go outside. We turned off the air unit.
And you sealed your home, I imagine?
As much as possible.
Right. Well, look, Marisela Orozco, thank you so kindly for being with us, and I'm glad that you were able to tell us your story. You have a wonderful day, okay?
You too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm now here with Annie Barra. Annie, how are you doing? Annie?
Please excuse me. Yes, sir. Please excuse me. I am right now in the mobile clinic trying to get checked out for the condition that I've been experiencing because of this Deer Park fire. So I'm in front right here with the nurse. So if you don't mind waiting for a few minutes, I can be online with you guys with no problem.
No problem. Let me go ahead and move on to a little something else, and I'll put you on hold. And what do you take, about 5 minutes or so?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Annie.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, folks, Annie is going to be with us. I want to play that interview that we did with Eleanor Goldfield. But before we do that, that's a fairly long interview. So what we're going to do here is discuss a few other issues that are occurring right now. I understand that Donald Trump has now placed on top of all the other sanctions on different people that we've had in Venezuela, he has now applied sanction to the banks. I don't know when countries are going to learn or when countries are going to understand the reality of these sanctions issues. The truth of the matter is, unless a population really, and I'm talking about the aggregate large amount of the population, wants to get rid of a particular dictator or a particular person, sanctions don't work. And let me tell you where this is going. Having been from Panama, Central America, what happened in Panama, because this is a story that I've already seen. And I'd like Americans to get in with the program and understand what's going on here with Venezuela. And then we're going to go with Eleanor Goldfield after talking to Annie Barras. But here's the issue, folks. Back in 1989, I know for some of you that is ancient, but back in 1989, there was a dictator in Panama called Manuel Antonio Noriega. And while he was in Panama, beforehand, he did a whole lot of work for the United States CIA. He did a whole lot of work for, in fact, they knew he was sort of in the drug trade. Well, he was financing the drug trade through the Panamanian banks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, America knew that. But because he worked for the CIA, all of that was swept under the ground. Well, they asked him to go ahead and, hey, help us invade Nicaragua. Help us do this in Central America. They wanted to, just like they're doing in Venezuela, they wanted to have some sort of a control over Nicaragua. He said no. When he said no to that, and this is stuff that's not reported, when he said no about that, suddenly his drug issue of being a capitalist, because, you know, America wants its drugs. America wants those drugs coming in from Colombia. So what did he do? He went ahead and he said, okay, I will be the capitalist here. And he made it easy for those drugs to make it into the United States of America, because the United States of America demanded wanting the drugs. Well, what happened thereafter? They placed all kinds of pressures on Panama. They stopped the dollar from flowing in Panama. When that happened, people were in dire straits. Well, people adapt. They turned into a barter system, and the country function. They were not able to overthrow Manuel Antonio Noriega. So what was the United States to do? The United States then sent in the airborne. They sent in the army. They sent the entire folks in to Panama, and they shot the place up. Over 10 in America, it's reported as 1,000 Panamanians dead. In the UN, it's reported as 4,000 Panamanians dead. For those of us who know the reality of the places where the United States dropped the bombs, including testing the stealth fighter, 10,000 Panamanians were killed, were murdered, because the United States wanted to get Manuel Antonio Noriega. Now, here is the deal, my dear brothers and sisters. Here is the deal. The same thing is happening in Venezuela right now. Last week, I interviewed the ambassador to Colombia, who forms part of the Grupo de Lima. And what is the Grupo de Lima? The Grupo de Lima is a group that's getting together, claiming to be a Latin American consortium to oust Nicolas Maduro. When I interviewed the ambassador told me, Egberto, you know, this is a complete Latin American operation. He told that to NPR when NPR interviewed him as well. I mean, he's a nice guy. I mean, both of us graduated from the same university, University of Texas. We're both Longhorns. But I asked him a question that NPR didn't ask him. Was Elliot Abrams with you? Did Elliot Abrams also meet with El Grupo de Lima? And he answered, I mean, I was thankful that he answered yes. They met with El Grupo de Lima, which means there is an American influence with this Latin American group intent on overthrowing Nicolas Maduro, someone that was elected democratically in the country. I mean, there may have been some hanky-panky with the elections. I don't know. But isn't that the same thing that happened with Donald Trump? Can anybody from Europe come and say, hey, Donald Trump, you're not really the president. We recognize Nancy Pelosi as the president. That is equivalent to what America and the European Union did with Nicolas Maduro and Guaido. So let's get real. Let's see if our guest, Barra, is ready yet, and then we'll come back. Miss Barra, are you ready yet, or are you still getting checked?
I actually just finished getting checked. I am ready.
Excellent. Ms. Barra, I understand that you were in the path of that smoke plume as well. How did it affect you, and when did you find out about what was going on?
So I found out the day that it actually occurred through a local source that, you know, it apparently came over the radio or the news. Mm-hmm. So immediately we took precaution. But since the very first day, my eyes started burning initially. Mm-hmm. I live within a mile of the area, wow. And my children go to school in Deer Park at the elementary school there. So it's very concerning when they tell us to stay, out of school on Monday, tell our children to go back to school on Tuesday, yet on Wednesday, they're telling us no, shelter in place.
Because they found
It's very concerning.
elevated levels of
Right.
benzene. Is that correct?
That is correct. So it's been a struggle trying to even get the facts. I did not send my children to school on Tuesday. I opted to keep them out. And they've had a 2-week spring break at this point, because I'm not going to take them to school. I mean, they're telling us it's okay for us to for us to be at home, after the shelter in place has been lifted. My concern is when this happened, Tuesday they said that there was no problems, that kids can go back to school, and then immediately we get 4:00 in the morning, I hear a siren going off. There's another shelter in place, and then they cancel school after that. So it's just been back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. There's not been some consistency with, telling us anything. It's just been, oh, it's safe. Oh, no, it's not safe. Initially it started with this many tanks, and then it went down to this. And there's just not enough of the facts being given to the public, the community.
Right.
And I think that at this point, what we need to do is we need those facts, because they obviously do not care about our children. We as parents need to take care of our children. And if we have the facts, we can then make that executive decision on what we want to do for our families.
Absolutely.
Not for them to decide what we're going to do.
Absolutely. And Bruce Pollard here is saying on Facebook Live, anytime there is uncontrolled burning, the result is many chemicals, some of them bad, especially when the fuel is benzene. So, as we're talking, we don't know what kind of chemicals also fell out of the air, whether there's some moisture that brought them into the dirt, into the ground, into the playgrounds where your kids are going to play. So, they have a whole lot of answering to do for all the people who are in that area, in that vicinity. And you know what is interesting, Annie Barra? What's interesting is this plume has gone way west. So we don't know how far or the extent of this damage that has occurred from this plant. And this plant, I understand, have been cited by every year, and several times it has been cited. Have you heard that before?
Yes, I have. I actually have heard that. In fact, from my understanding, this particular plant is a privately owned plant, and apparently this is more of a storage facility for chemicals.
Right.
So think about like a storage for furniture. Think about how many people store their furniture at these places. This is chemicals. People are storing their chemicals, inside these storage, facilities. These tanks are huge. They cost lots of money, I'm pretty certain. But they also make a lot of money doing that. So with that, they should be able to afford to protect the people around those areas. Whatever it may be to protect them, you have a community next door to these plants. We believe what you're telling us. We trust that you're telling us that we are safe to live in this environment, and when something were to happen, or if something were to happen, that you have the resources and the things set in place, you have a plan to get it taken care of immediately. Well, you've proven to us that you don't have a plan in place. I'm scared at this point.
Well, let me give you
the other companies.
Let me give you some other information that I think you ought to know. I don't know if you read it yet, but there is a breach with one of the walls that was holding back those substances that were released from the tanks.
I just read that.
Yes. So
I just read that.
Right. So be careful. I have to go to the next segment, Annie Barra, but I really appreciate you calling in, and we wanted to air your concerns because we want all this information out there. We'll write up a little something further on, and thank you so kindly for being with us. You have a wonderful day, okay?
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. Yes,
Absolutely.
sir. You too.
Take care now. Folks, that was Annie Barra. Annie Barra, and she was lives 1 mile away from the plant. We have to speed up now and get to the next guest. This is a friend of mine, an activist, somebody I have a whole lot of respect for. I want you to listen to all that she has to say. How should I say this? She has been around for a long time. And if you listen to the empathy with much of what she has to say, I think you're going to like her just as much as most activists around the country see through her. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is say, let's get busy and listen to Eleanor Goldfield. I'm here with Eleanor Goldfield. I met Eleanor several years ago with Move to Amend, and I was very... I'm here with Eleanor Goldfield. I met Eleanor several years ago with Move to Amend, and I was very impressed. You know, when we see young people taking control, there's nothing like that happening, and that is what we have with Eleanor Goldfield. She is an activist, a poet, a writer, a journalist, a singer, and if you ever see her in her band, you see how she looks right now? She can also do the band thing very well. But anyhow, Eleanor Goldfield, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's great to be back with you, Egberto.
Well, look, let me ask you a few questions. We are in a crazy time right now. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself to remind some of our audience who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a creative activist and a journalist. I have a show that airs every week on Free Speech TV called Act Out, and you can find that at freespeech.org. And basically, it's a show that tries to show people what's going on the front lines of these movements, to plug people into to existing fights and builds to create the world that we want to live in. And to let them know what the real news is, the stuff that corporate media will never actually bring us and that they censor consistently. So that's the show. And then I do community organizing on the DC level and write for several different outlets, both in the United States and also in Sweden. I'm half Swedish.
Now, tell us a little bit about the kind of writings that you do. I've actually blogged some of the stuff that you've written, but tell us a little bit about what you cover.
Well, name a topic. I consider myself a bit of an activist nomad, and I talk a lot about, when I do activist trainings and things like that, I talk about how interconnected our issues are. I think one of the problems that the left has is that we silo our issues, right? We're like, oh, we're the healthcare movement, and we're the money out of politics movement, and we're Black Lives Matter, and we're the women's rights movement. But these are all the same thing. They all exist under the larger systemic problem that affects all of these issues equally. So we have to come together and work together outside of our silo issues. And so that's one of the things that I do, and that's part of why I consider myself an activist nomad and go to a variety of different issues depending on the time and place. So one of my most recent articles that I wrote was about immigration and comparing Sweden to the United States. Also done a lot of work on the Medicare for All fight and the issue of healthcare being a human right. So yeah, name an issue, and and I'm happy to cover it.
Well, I'm actually glad that you said that, because that's exactly what we have to do on the left side of the equation if we are to really make progress. Those silos are currently killing the movement, and unless we get them together and unite them, it's going to stay that way. And what I find is, and this is why I really enjoy, I like to say, hanging more with the younger folks, the millennials, the Gen Zs, and so forth. And the reason why is that you guys see the common purpose, and I don't know if it has to do with let's say the older Gen Xers and the baby boomers taking it all. Do you feel that sort of concern that, well, look at what you have done to the economy thus far, so you guys have nothing to lose?
I mean, I think the blame game is pointless, because I think it's because, look, I mean, I know people that are far older than me that have spent their entire lives on the front lines of the civil rights movement, of the climate movement. So I think in every generation there are those who fight, there are those who are apathetic. I think that you can look at the trajectory of culture and say that, yeah, people during the 50s and 60s were much more like, oh, whatever, let's, like towards the middle of the 60s, people really got, but there were still people that were apathetic, right? And I think that that's the problem in every generation. So to me, it's not a matter of, look what you've done to us. It's just a matter of, yeah, I mean, my parents had less cares when they were young, but that's not necessarily their fault. I think the bigger problem that we have to look at now, rather than saying you put us here, is to look up at the elite and say you put us here. It's not a generational thing; it's a class thing. And even when my parents were young, there was still a class thing. This hierarchical capitalist system goes back far beyond the previous generation. So I think it's much more important to look at that and say, okay, well, what do we do now as we see the fall of this system and this end game of climate change? What are we going to do about it, as opposed to throwing stones at each other, which is also something that the left is really good at. There's a saying that when the left has a meeting, we all sit in a circle to organize. Unfortunately, that's also how we do a firing squad.
No, I mean, believe it or not, I speak to quite a few younger folks, and you are one of the first that is looking at it solely from that point of view. Let's forget about any sort of blame, or let's forget about those sort of issues. So I want to take you back there a bit, and let me tell you why I want to take you there a bit. Let's look at 1980. Okay, don't you think that taxation and the way that we handle what the government did for people changed dramatically in the 80s? And don't you think that that we have to examine that causality, and that causality does have aging in there?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think that, I think if you look at the rise of neoliberalism and the restructuring of our entire economic and social justice system, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and I misspoke. I said the 50s and 60s people were kind of whatever, but that was actually the later 70s and 80s, and certainly the 90s. And so I think that you definitely have to take that into consideration and see. One of the things that I think is interesting is, okay, so why did people unplug? Why? And I think a lot of that was with the Vietnam War and the assassination of people like Martin Luther King Jr. And people felt that their hope had literally been murdered. And I think that's why a lot of people unplugged, and a lot of people felt burnt out and that they just couldn't fight anymore. And of course, this is when you see the rise of neoliberalism and you see the rise of things like the Powell Memo and a restructuring of a more corporatized system that is friendly, and the activist Supreme Court that takes the side of corporations and profit over people. And of course, you could say the same thing about even back in 2003. Where was the anti-war movement? Why couldn't we rise to the sound of that Vietnam era anti-war movement with the Iraq War? Is it that we just had a totally different system that we were going up against? I mean, the system had changed, but so I think that you definitely have to look at how the structure has changed. But overall, I think that one of the most important things is to see how we've adapted. And I talk about this a lot too, that human adaptability is what has gotten us this far, but now it's killing us, ironically.
Wait, explain that. I don't quite follow that. Tell me a little bit more.
Yeah, so if you think evolutionarily speaking, right, our ability to adapt to extreme situations is why humans have progressed. And yet now that adaptability has made us the frog in the boiling water. We've adapted to rising income inequality. We've adapted to no health care. We've adapted to longer working hours. We've adapted to perpetual war. We've adapted to the destruction of our environment. So this is the reality of the situation. And again, I think that you can definitely look back at history and see specific points where this really started to happen, in like the 1980s. But I think overall, my focus now is, okay, well, how do I pull people out of that adaptability? How do I get people out of that comfort zone before they're incredibly wrenched out of that comfort zone by rising sea waters or by the next financial crash or what have you?
I love that analogy with the boiling water and the frog. I mean, the frog not realizing the water is getting hot until it's boiled. I first heard that story with an activist in Detroit when we went out there for, I think it was Netroots Nation or one of those. That is so true what you're saying there. Okay, now state of the country. Tell me as you see it, where are we now at point zero? Where are we right now?
I saw a really good tweet that basically said it's an amazing time to be alive because it's like the fall of the Roman Empire, but with Wi-Fi. And that's kind of how I feel.
Okay.
Because the U.S. is an empire. We've got 1,000 military bases around the world. Our military is stationed in active roles in 40% of the countries around the world. We are an empire. Not least of all looking at what we're trying to do in Venezuela. So I think that we are definitely an empire, and the question is, how is this empire going to fall? Of course, I live in hope, and I hope that it's not incredibly violent. But that has to do with how the people mobilize. And I think that right now the state is that, people younger than me are looking at their futures and they're not seeing anything promising. And so they're mobilizing. And I think that this is a very pivotal moment. And I think we could either go in the direction where we see the continuous rise of the far right. And I don't use the word fascism lightly. But I think that that's really what we're looking at. Or we go in the direction where people take control of our power, because people do have the power. And that's not something that I use as a cliche, trope. It's true. Because if we just decided tomorrow that we're not going to go to work, or that we're not going to go to school, or what have you, the economy would grind to a halt. The
Right.
entire system would break down. So I think that if we can continue down this road of recognizing our power and mobilizing on that, then I think that state of the union, so to speak, looks really quite bright. Then on the other side, there's the not so bright direction. And I don't see a third direction, to be honest. I think capitalism, the fall of capitalism will either kill us or we kill the fall of capitalism. I really only see those two options on the table.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's amazing that you mentioned about what the young people see. And that is something that I've been attempting to preach for a long time to, especially those folks that are talking about moderation. Let's be moderate. Let's be moderate. What I try to tell them is that, look, I am from Central America. I'm from a place where people know what it means we don't really have an option. And not only we don't have an option, what do we have to lose? And when you don't have anything to lose, you don't have anything to lose. And that is where a whole lot of the younger folks are. They're in a whole lot of student debt. They will never buy a home. They will never buy a car, and they're going to live at home. And their parents mortgaged their homes to send them to school. And now nobody has anything. How do we get out of that? And but anyhow, you actually brought up Venezuela. Interestingly, I interviewed the ambassador to Colombia last week, who is attempting to convince Americans that we really need to go into Venezuela. And in fact, guess what he's saying? He's saying that El Grupo de Lima is a group of Latin American countries, including the country of my origin, that got together completely without the United States to go ahead and try to oust Nicolas Maduro. Interestingly, guess what he said? I asked him, because he was interviewed by NPR, or mainstream media. He was interviewed by NPR. And NPR never asked him the question. They just accepted that he said it was a completely Latin American solution. So I asked him, by the way, have that group met with Elliot Abrams? What do you think his answer was?
Well, it depends on whether he answered truthfully or not.
He answered truthfully. I mean, we were so comfortable. He answered just about everything truthfully.
Yeah, of course.
He met with Elliot Abrams. And what does that mean to you?
Well, Elliot Abrams is a psychopathic war criminal. So, and I think you only need to look so far as John Kiriakou pointed out that
yes,
Bolsonaro's first stop after he got off the plane was to go to Langley, CIA headquarters. Now, why would the head of state for Brazil go to CIA headquarters, where they admitted that they just openly talked about toppling Maduro? And why is Colombia so interested in Venezuelan human rights violations when Colombia has excessive human rights violations going on in their own country constantly that predominantly affect indigenous and Afro-Colombian residents?
Exactly. So, I mean, it's all cabal, it's all intertwined. Now let's move this. I brought that up because you brought up Venezuela, and I thought, wow, that was an interesting segue. But anyhow, going back to our local our local issues, Trump. Before I go to tell me a little bit about where does this stuff end? I just did a little video after I watched all the news media concentrate themselves today on his tweets over the weekend and how he's bastardizing McCain. And I'm like, don't you guys see the diversion? That is not what it's all about. What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious if you came out in the same place I did.
So I actively ignore most of what Trump says.
Right. Good.
Because like you said, it's a diversion. It totally is. It's that ADD look here, shiny, and mainstream media just eats it up.
Right.
And meanwhile, it doesn't comment on things like what's really going on in Venezuela or Yemen or what's going on even in the United States. You know, the fact that Flint still doesn't have clean water, or the fact that, these places that have been devastated by hurricanes, like North Carolina or Houston, or the fires in California, that these places haven't gotten any federal aid. There's no commentary on this. There's only the commentary that Trump said something mean about a dead guy. Who cares? Who cares? It's not important. And I think this is the problem. This is what it's a big problem in the U.S. One of the biggest roadblocks that I see to actually realizing a significant change is media literacy. I'm sure that if people were to watch your show, a lot of people would say, "Wait, what? I didn't know that."
Exactly.
Really? Because the corporatized media, their whole objective is to keep a uninformed populace that just goes with the flow. And, as they say, only dead fish go with the flow. So, I think that that's very, very indicative of where, unfortunately, a lot of people are. Interestingly enough, if you look at young people under the age of 35, the majority of them don't go to corporatized news for their news, which is, I think, another ray of sunshine and hope, is that people under the age of 35 are watching things like your show and my show and seeing behind the veil of the propaganda. But of course, people outside of that who do watch mainstream media are going to be concerned about what Trump tweeted, and they're going to be concerned about the two-party system, and using the same line like, "Oh, we just have to vote blue no matter who," that sort of tired trope. So that's I think it all comes down, in that sense, with regards to Trump's tweets, it all comes down to media literacy, really.
Yeah, it is amazing. That is so true. Now, I back in just before the election in New York, where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her primary, I interviewed her at Netroots Nation.
Nice.
And interestingly, I found her to be extraordinarily smart. Okay. Now, and let me tell you, I'm not talking about just what we spoke on camera. I found her, she's very young, and I found her to be more, how should I say, more mature for her age when we were off camera talking about these particular issues. I think she was at Standing Rock I think you were at Standing Rock yourself, right?
I was not, but I reported on it.
Okay, great. Anyhow, she did all of that and so forth. So I'm interested to say your thoughts on her as a younger person, if it matches mine, and what you think about how she's doing things right now.
Well, yeah, I agree. She's brilliant. And, I think one of the things about, because I've also been told by people, wow, you're awfully, mature for your age. And my comment was always, well, I have to be.
Exactly.
But I think, I think she's definitely brilliant, and I think it's a testament to her power and her determination, and also the distrust that people have with the establishment that she is where she is. I think those two things definitely came together to create the space for her to win. I will say this: I don't agree with her on everything, but I don't think that you'll ever find a candidate where you're like, wow, you are exactly a carbon copy of my brain. That would be weird. I think the whole point of a representative is to have someone that you can push, because the whole point of a representative is to represent you. So if you say, I agree with you on this, but I don't agree with you on that, their job is to listen.
Exactly.
In, a democracy or a republic or whatever, which we don't have. But I also, and that's the problem. And that's the problem is that
it's true though. I mean, first of all, why the hell do we have an electoral college? And when I complain about it, people talk about, well, we were never a democracy. We were always a representative republic.
But that's also ridiculous, because the electoral college is basically a way to say, whatever you just said, we don't agree.
Doesn't matter. Exactly.
Right. That's the whole point of it.
Exactly.
Same thing with the Supreme Court. They have no accountability to anybody. So they just say, okay, this is the supreme law of the land. And you're like, but I disagree. And they're like, don't care. We're not accountable to you.
Exactly.
And that's the problem, is that, people look at someone like Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar and they're like, wow, you're our savior. And then I'm the rain cloud that's like, hey, we don't have that kind of system. Even if Ocasio-Cortez were president, we don't have that kind of system. There is no such thing as a savior in Congress or in the White House. So I think that it's really important that we recognize what these representatives represent, and also that the quote unquote blue wave of 2018 was a corporate wave. The majority of Democrats that won were establishment Dems. The majority of them, for instance, do not support Medicare for all. So I think it's important that we recognize that although we got someone like Ocasio-Cortez in there, it's not at all indicative of enough progress to sit back and say, we're on the right track. If anything, it's to show that disparity, and having her in Congress shows just how far of a gap there is between what the people want and what Congress is doing.
But you know what else? You just said something that's interesting. You said the gap between what the people want and what we have in Congress. And likewise, if you take a look at mainstream media right now, they're trying to convince people that she is too left and that the people don't, in as much as all the things that she's talking about, or many of the things that she's talking about, polls at 70, 80%. But somehow she is the left fringe. Programs like yours, that's the importance of building programs like yours, programs like mine, that it's not about just building, it's about we have to get them built. And we have to get the throughput in, as much as I don't know if you've noticed yet, but how much we're being throttled, especially on the left side of we are being throttled to kingdom come right now. So, I mean, we have to, I just sent out a mailer recently where I told my people on my list, which is growing pretty large now, that look, remember this, we're going back to the old fashioned way of activism now, email and direct contact. Because what's happening. And then, in saying that, I recall you coming out with, I think, a piece that you did where you actually sent people to a new platform to say, hey, things are going to get here. Why don't you now this message is not this message is for everybody that I want you to talk about, but talk about it mostly from an activist point of view, because we have to sort of help activists as well expand their horizons and how they can move their message, get their message out even further.
Well, I'll start by saying that everyone is an activist if they want to be.
I like that. I stand corrected.
This is something that I talk about a lot, is because I think people think of the word activist and they're like, oh, but I don't have the time to spend that much on going to a blockade or a protest. And that's not it. Activism starts with caring, and then acting on that, whether that be, organizing with your church group on, something like feeding the homeless. Like, it doesn't have to mean that you go do a tree sit for 2 months, right?
Right.
So I think it's important that we all recognize that we're capable and are needed. The second part is that, so Facebook has, for those who aren't aware, Facebook has purged a lot of alternative media pages. And for those who are left, like myself, have severely censored. So I get a few messages every week saying, oh my gosh, I didn't even know your page still existed. Right. I keep having to go back and like it again, or I keep trying to see your posts, but I won't see them. So Facebook is doing a great job of throttling alternative voices because, of course, they're in league with people like the Atlantic Council, who was on the board of their fake news department, and anything that isn't state condoned is considered fake news or Russian or whatever. So I've also started posting on a platform called Minds, Minds, like mind, minds.com. And it's an alternative platform that is decentralized. It's non-surveillance, and it's open source. And what that means is that anybody can go in there and look at the code. So you can see if there's an algorithm that looks weird, that would for some reason not allow your content to be seen. But also because it's decentralized, there's no central authority that dictates whose content gets seen. And so that's currently a good alternative to Facebook. Of course, it hasn't grown to the size of Facebook, but it already has several million users. And it's a good platform for alternative media outlets to be on. I mean, Mint Press News is on there. I'm on there. Lee Camp is on there. Alternet, Anti-Media being one of the pages that was purged from Facebook.
Pulled down, yeah. I remember Robert Rodrigo had some issues with that when that happened.
So it's I mean, it's an important time for people to start looking at alternatives for the big social media networks. And this is not to say delete your Facebook account. I know you want to stay in touch with your niece or whoever on Facebook, but also consider a different platform for your news, because understand that the State Department and folks like the Atlantic Council are dictating what news you see on Facebook.
Now, let me ask you a little bit about Minds.com, because I did create an account a while back, but hadn't followed up with it much. Have you started to see some traffic on the platform pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely traffic, and people are, it's still getting worked out. But the cool thing is also that you can, because it's still growing, you have more say.
Right.
So you can actually get in touch with the developers and say, hey, I'd like to see this. Like, this is a parameter that I'd be interested in seeing here. And you can network with people easier. And there's, things are basically organized via hashtag. So if you post something on Minds under, say, hashtag news or hashtag politics, then that's just under that hashtag. It's not sorted under any sort of algorithm. It's just there.
Okay.
So there's definitely some traffic, and there's also, I mean, this could be a whole other,
section, program.
But
right.
There's also potential for cryptocurrency on Minds as well.
Yeah. Now, before we go, tell me what you think about the current state of the Democratic Party and the current folks that are running. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Well, first of all, I'm pretty sure like everyone and their mother is running as the Democrat in 2020. I mean, I don't know anyone who's not running. And second of all, I agree with Michelle Alexander, the writer of the author of The New Jim Crow, when she said it would be easier to just create a new party than trying to reform the Democrats. I trust the Dems about as far as I could throw the lot.
Let me stop you for a second there, because I have of several minds there. I continue to work with the party with the other expectation that somehow we can do better. Now you opened up another door. I was about to cut this short in 2 minutes. Now you're forcing me to ask you another question. Right? How, in a two-party system, how do you envision getting another party successfully intertwined into the whole thing?
Well, if you look historically, and I definitely recommend having Nick Brana on your show. I think he'd be great as well. He's the founder of Movement for a People's Party, and was pretty high up in Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. Has 10 years experience working with the Democratic Party from the inside. He's seen how the sausage has been made, so to speak. And if you look historically, when the Republican Party was first formed, it was basically because the Whig Party fell apart.
Right.
And I think what we're seeing now is the Democratic Party is falling apart. I mean, if you just look at, they're absolutely just like desperately flailing. And I think and people are really over it. If you look at the reality of folks in this country, the majority of Americans are independent.
Yeah, they're unaffiliated. Absolutely.
Yeah. So almost more than Democrats and Republicans combined.
Actually,
So-
yeah, exactly. Combined. I thought you were going to say a bit.
Oh,
Okay, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So I think that this is a very powerful time to take that energy and what, for instance, what the Movement for the People's Party is doing is taking the people that the Democrats take for granted. So, for instance, the labor movement. Union members very often vote Democrat because the Democrats are always talking about wages and always talking, but they do nothing for unions.
Right.
And so and the AFL-CIO actually released a statement at their last national meeting saying that regardless of whether it's Republicans or Democrats, they always go with Wall Street. And that's huge because the AFL-CIO is the biggest coalition of unions in the country. So for them to release a statement that says basically screw both of you guys is huge. And I think that really shows how workers in this country are feeling. And so I think it's a great time for that party to come in. And the way that would work is really just using the system that we have. You can start a new party. And if you get enough signatures, if you get the signatures of millions of people who are fed up with the Dems, well, then you have yourself a party. And I think that there is definitely reason to believe that some of the more progressive people that are running as Democrats because they see it as their only option would then run in a new party platform.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point because, to put it bluntly, that's where many folk, in fact, many activists like myself who straddle the fence, that's where we are. You know, well, look, Eleanor Goldfield, let me tell you, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. I think this is the third time that we're on because you always bring something new all the time. So before we go, let me tell you, Act Out is one of the better, well-done shows, and I carry that sometimes at the liberalnetwork.com and of course at egbertowillies.com. She knows what she is talking about, and she goes in depth with what she is doing.
Also in depth.
Look, activism is not lucrative, is it?
No,
it's not lucrative. And, you know, so we try all kinds of avenues to say, folks, invest in what we're doing because we're saving you.
I know.
We are the ones that are going to prevent the bloodshed. We are the ones that are going to prevent all of that. Eleanor, tell us a little bit about your show again so that people can get there. What I want to do, and I'm going to put this in the blog as well, I want to throw you all over the place with your show because I love it. I learn from your show. Thank you. You're always well done. So give a plug for your show.
Okay, thank you. So my show airs on Free Speech TV. It's also online and on podcast via iTunes and Stitcher and Spotify. And links to all of that you can find on my home website, which is artkillingapathy.com. And you can also get Act Out via Free Speech TV, which is freespeech.org. And yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions or connect and check out my show and the other creative activism work that I do, and any support and spreading the message is greatly appreciated. And thank you, Egberto, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Absolutely. Eleanor Goldfield, thank you so kindly for having been with us. And we'll continue to check you out, and we'll continue to get all those programs, okay?
Thank you. Likewise. Be well.
Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed Eleanor. Eleanor is great. I love her shows. And like I said, you're never too young. You're never too old. You're never too whatever to check her out and check out the programs that she has. She always goes depth. I said depth again. In depth on issues. Well, I guess it's time, since it's been so long and we had such a full show, it's time for me to go ahead and say, folks, please remember this is not only a call-in show, but this is also a progressive show that needs your support. Please go to patreon.com/politics done right. Again, that is patreon.com/politics done right. Anybody subscribing to our program will get How to Make America Utopia access online immediately. I'm writing this book right now. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 is online. I'm going to try to get Chapter 3 out as soon as possible to get online as well. But guess what? Book is there already online completely as I see it. Class Warfare, the only resort to right-wing doom. And let me tell you, folks, that is a book that has quite a bit of information that I think you're going to find quite useful. You're going to understand how the economy works. You're going to understand how a whole lot of things work in there in a very easy to understand way. I'm pretty sure you are going to like it. And then, of course, you guys know I've had the battle with going up and down in weight, and I think I finally have it licked. But again, we still give everybody hope, expectation. But lose weight and be fit now. I just got to writing that book a couple of weeks now, so check it out. That one is at Amazon.com as well. But then don't forget, you can. We're going to have it online as well to read for those people who subscribe to Politics Done Right. So please go to Patreon.com, patreon.com/politics done right. We really need your support. In order to continue this endeavor, we have a lot of work to do. When I say we have a lot of work to do, I mean that we have a lot of work to do. But you know what? We're doing it. And the greatest thing about the work that we're doing is it's all over the country that people are getting together from all sides, right? People are starting to say, oh, we have to make a difference. We can't wait for something organized. So what you see is you have all these loose alliances getting together. You notice Politics Done Right, Act Out, TYT, Tim Black. A lot of these different folks are getting together and saying, you know what, in a fashion in which we are not centralized, gives us a whole lot of power where there's no one way to kill the beast, if you will. In other words, nobody's going to shut everybody down. So that is the whole goal of our movement. This really new way of extending information, informing more in depth than the mainstream media. The article that I wrote today at my site, the article talked about Donald Trump is going to be reelected. If everything being equal today, absent the media, the independent media like what we are doing, absent us getting to enough people, Donald Trump will be reelected. Let me give a good reason and an example. Look like I got a call. Let me go ahead and take this call in. Caller, come on in. Caller, come on in. Caller, you're on.
Hello?
Yes, you're on.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Would you like to add to the discussion, sir?
Yeah, this whole Donald Trump thing, he's definitely going to get reelected.
There's a good possibility,
everyone kind of knows even up to debate.
Well, I mean, there's a possibility. Are you a Donald Trump supporter, sir?
I am, yes. And you got a sexy bald head as well. I'd love to grease that up and shove it right up my ass.
Oh, boy. One of those. You have a wonderful day, my friend. Take care. Are you a Donald? Okay. You always get some crazies that call in. Anyhow, folks, let me tell you. Give us a what am I saying? Give us a call. Please remember, we need your support. Go to patreon.com, patreon.com/politics done right. Make sure that we can continue to give the message. Because I'm telling you, if we are not successful, if the likes of Eleanor Goldfield is not successful, then Donald Trump will be elected again. And the reason why is, let me give an example today, okay? Let me give an example today. Take a look at the news media today. The story of John McCain. Think about, why would John McCain go ahead and talk about McCain, about John McCain. Why would Donald Trump talk about John McCain? I mean, that is just out of left field. But what he knows is that will take up a whole several news cycle. It'll keep your eyes off the ball. So as we prepare to hear the Mueller report, which, by the way, I don't think is going to be all that anyway, but he wants to have all those messaging diluted. So here's what he's setting up for. Let's say the Mueller report is not all that bad for him, right? But it's still bad, or it's still out there. He has diluted the message because we're going to also talk about his crazy attitude about talking about McCain. We're going to talk about the tweet storm. We're going to talk about all these other issues because they have an inability. The media has an inability to chew gum and report at the same time. Now, what we are trying to do in independent media, and you see me bring some of them on. I'm going to bring Tim Black on pretty soon. I'll try to bring him on pretty soon. So there's a whole lot of this going on. What we're going to do is we're going to keep up the pressure, but we need your support. So please go to patreon.com/politics done right. That is patreon.com/politics done right. And like I said, you get How to Make America Utopia. You also get As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom. Now that book is complete and online already. And of course, the weight loss book, Lose Weight and Be Fit Now. Say no to snake oil weight loss. Folks, we're at the end of the show. I thank you so kindly for spending the time with us. I want to thank Eleanor Goldfield. Every time I have her on, it's always a good thing, a learning experience. And what I like is how circumspect she is on just about every issue we've spoken about, and we've spoken about in the past as well. So you guys have a wonderful day. Please support Politics Done Right, patreon.com/Politics Done Right. Let's do this together. I need thousands of supporters right now. Thousands of low amount supporters. So go to patreon.com/Politics Done Right. My name is Egberto Willies, and you know how I end this program now. I am out.
Welcome to Politics Done Right. I am your host, Egberto Willies. This is the progressive program that will take the mystery out of politics. This is the program that will encourage you to make sure government becomes we the people. Whether you are liberal, conservative, or otherwise, you get to air your point of view. Remember, you can also send me a tweet to EGBERTOWILLIES. That is at Egberto Willies. Let us engage. It is Politics Done Right.
1, 2, 3, 4.